Hi, this is Dr. Joe Green, head pastor of Antioch Assembly Church located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, also the founder of the 2019 movement, and I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. You know, there's a movie called The Matrix, and The Matrix is a movie with Keanu Reeves. It was a very popular movie. They actually made 3 parts of The Matrix, and basically the theme of The Matrix is that this world that we live in is a simulation. And I would have to agree to a certain extent to that fact that the world that we live in, the world system that we live in is not what most people would think it is. It is a sort of a simulation. You know, the Bible talks about this world and this world system. Jesus calls the devil, Satan, the ruler of this world. The Bible also tells us as Christians that we're in the world, but we're not of the world. And so the Bible kind of also attests to the fact that the world system, the way it's set up now, is not what most people would think it is. The Bible also says that the ruler of this world has deceived the people of the world. So, but I want to examine just for a couple of moments the origin of this current system and how it's meant to deceive us and to kind of lead us astray. You know, the Bible talks about how we are supposed to be led by the Spirit and not by the flesh, because the things that we see and the things that we feel in our emotions or our feelings can be twisted or distorted because of this simulation that we live in. That's why it tells us that we are to operate in the Spirit. Those who have the Spirit of God and also have the Word of God will not fall victim to the deception of this of this world system that is created by the enemy, which is why it's so important for us to look at things through our spiritual eyes. And I see a lot of people, especially those who are in the church and call themselves Christians, they are so caught up in this world system, and they lack such discernment, spiritual discernment of the times that we're in. Because they are operating in the flesh and not in the spirit. Especially, you know, being an African American pastor, black people especially, we have gotten so much into our flesh and so much into our emotions that we're driven by our anger and our pain, and so a lot of times we're not seeing the truth of the matter because we're walking after the flesh and not after the spirit. So anyway, I want to talk, let's look at how this system came to be in the modern era, or the modern age. You know, in Revelation chapter 2 and Revelation chapter 3, it talks about the synagogue of Satan. They say that they're Jews, but they're not. The synagogue of Satan. It talks about Pergamos and Pergamum. Now, if you know where Pergamum was in the ancient world, it is where modern day Turkey in that region is currently, and it's an area known as the Caucasus or the Caucasoid Mountains, the Caucasus Valley. And so in that particular region, you had a group of people called the Khazars, and the Khazars were they worshipped the Mystery Babylon, pagan, heathen religion, if you will. And the phallic symbol was something that was very prevalent in what they worshiped. They worshipped the phallus. Now, real quick, if you've been following the movement, if you've been following the teaching, I would just ask you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's a lot of information there, but I talk about the headquarters of this one world governmental system, also known as the New World Order. So there's 3 primary capitals. Now, the New World Order Mystery Babylon system is based on economics, religion, and government. So if you understand the religious headquarters of this one world system, one world governmental system, is the Roman Empire, Roman Catholic Church, Vatican City. If you understand the economic headquarters of this one world system, the international banking system, is London, England, and the governmental headquarters is Washington, D.C. Now, the reason you know it's Washington, D.C. and that this the Washington, D.C. is the headquarters for the New World Order, one world governmental system, each of 3 of those capitals have a major phallic symbol. And if you don't know what a phallic symbol is, it's the male organ. So that's what's known as a phallus or a phallic symbol. So each of them have a large phallus symbol, which is the New World Order, Mystery Babylon, marking their territory. So you know the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., and the Washington Monument is the symbol for the the New World Order in Washington, D.C. You have in London and also Vatican City the same type of symbology. Anytime you have a government, you have laws and you have to enforce those laws. So municipalities have police forces. You have a city, you have city police, state police. The governments have a police force known as their army or their military. So our military is the police force basically for the New World Order system, which means they carry out or execute to make sure that the laws of this system are adhered to. Now, these Khazars that I was mentioning or talking about, they actually migrated into Europe, more importantly into the area of Bavaria in Germany. They were there. They had changed their name to Bauer, I'm sorry. And then over time, they changed their name to Rothschild. Now, they also came in the 1700s. They came up with a plan for implementing their New World Order system. So they developed a 3 World War strategy. Albert Pike, who wrote the book Morals and Dogma, which is basically the Bible for Masons. He was also a high-level Freemason, also part of the Illuminati. Came up with a strategy for these 3 wars. And what happened is after the First World War, Germany didn't get the results that they wanted to. And so, and of course, the Rothschild family is from Germany. They were behind a lot of this. The Order of the Illuminati, Adam Weishaupt, he came up with, he wrote the plans for the Illuminati. The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion is a book you may want to look up. People will tell you it's not a real document, but it absolutely is a real document. And the reason you know it is because if you look from a historical standpoint, that many of the countries in Europe discovered the conspiracy of the Illuminati, and they actually passed laws to ban them from their countries. Which, of course, if it didn't actually exist, then no one would have passed the law to go against them. But so you had that happen. You had the world wars. You had another interesting thing happen with the international bankers. So the Rothschild family, which is the family that is basically the foundational family for the international bankers, he had 5 sons. The Rothschild patriarch, he had 5 sons, and he sent those sons to various countries in Europe. One in Germany, and one was in England. So there's a connection between England and Germany in this one world system. Another interesting fact is that the royal family, which is known as the Windsor family, and they just recently had a marriage between Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, and the whole world stops every time they have this or every time they have a baby. And but most people don't realize that the Windsor family is actually German. And their name up until the 1917, their name actually was the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha family, which is German, but they changed the name to Windsor in 1917 because after World War I, there was a big backlash against the German people. And seemed like the whole world was coming against them. And the reason the Allies understood what Germany was really trying to do by implementing a one world governmental system is they split Germany in half. After the Hitler and the Nazis, they split Germany in half. But anyway, there was a lot of backlash against the German people. Germany was decimated after World War I, and they recognized that their plan wasn't going forward as they wanted it to. So they devised a strategy in order to change things. They started to study human nature. They had a thing called the Frankfurt School in Germany. The Frankfurt School is what's known as the think tank. They got these intellectuals from the education, from the arts, from politics, from business. They would get the elite class of people, and that they would be a part of these think tanks to come up with a strategy and how to implement their one world governmental system, and they would put it into practice. Which is basically what the Illuminati is all about. The Illuminati is these people that call themselves the Illuminated Ones, that have a strategy for a one world governmental system. And like I said, if you've been following what we've been teaching, then I go into a little bit more detail about it. But just for the sake of time, just understand that This is their strategy. They have the best and the brightest. These people believe that they have secret knowledge, which is the basis for Freemasonry. And that secret knowledge comes from Lucifer. Lucifer, his name in Hebrew means the light bearer or the light bringer. So they believe that it is Lucifer, the fallen angel, that is the head of the New World Order, one world governmental system, that gives them the secret knowledge that makes them gods, which gives them the right to rule and to reign over the earth. So, and just like in Genesis 3, when the serpent told Adam and Eve that if you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you'll be like God, and you'll be able to determine what's right and what's wrong. So a lot of times we get caught up in the idea of not believing that there's a conspiracy to rule the world, and primarily because we want to believe inherently that people are good. That's one of the main reasons. But the other part of that is because they understand the human condition and the human nature, and they studied how to manipulate and to twist and to deceive the nations. That's why Jesus says the prince of this world has blinded the people. He knows how to manipulate people. So the Frankfurt School, they came up with a strategy in how to control the masses, because they believe the reason that they lost World War I is because they didn't get the people submissive enough to the government and to buy into their plan enough. And so they wanted to come up with a way in how to get people more submissive and to be easier, and for them to be able to manipulate people easier. So they came up with a multi-level strategy, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those strategies. But anyway, so you had the Frankfurt School. Then in World War II, with the Nazi Germans, they actually were implementing many of those plans, like, for instance, propaganda, known as public relations. They understood how to manipulate. Again, I said they would get the best and the brightest from the arts, from the news media. So back in Germany, you had radio, you had movies. Television didn't come around until a little bit later than that. But they used the mainstream media. They used media and advertising and all these things to sway public opinion. They started to perfect those things. They actually had what was known as the Ministry of Propaganda during that time. And he was the one that helped to push their agenda, because what propaganda does, it's a way of getting the masses to accept a certain strategy or agenda or a position. And so they use that. Okay, so they employed their tactics. It worked to a certain degree, except for they ran into the Allied forces. And of course, America stepped in and they thwarted Hitler and the Nazis from taking over the world. They had begun to advance through various parts of Europe. But you had the Frankfurt School, you had these scientists, you had these think tanks. And like I told you, there was a connection between Germany and England. So these people from the Frankfurt School, actually, many of them came to Tavistock, the Western World and Tavistock Institute, and they studied the human nature. They also developed over time, after World War II, what is known as the intelligence agencies. So one of them in particular was the CIA. So that you have to recognize the CIA is an arm of the New World Order, Illuminati system, and so they use them to carry out their plans for a one world governmental system. And this is all well documented. And let me give you a little history. One of the families that's involved in that is the Bush family. And so you had the Russell family, the Delano family. You had some of the others, the Rockefellers and the Kennedys and the Onassis family are also American families that are part of this system. But anyway, you had the Russell family. The Russell family got very wealthy off of moving drugs or opium. They would ship opium from Turkey into China. And, this is during the time that the Chinese were occupied by the British. They were trying to get the British out. There was an uprising. So in order to keep them from stirring up, they actually started to flood China with opium. And it helped to quiet parts of the plan. So one of the strategies that they use is drug smuggling. And the Russell family, you may not be familiar with the Russell family, but the Russell family got wealthy off of smuggling opium into China. The Russell family also, at Yale University, was one of the founding families of what's known as the Skull and Bones, and Skull and Bones actually created the CIA. So all this is all interconnected, and they have consistently over time used drugs. They use, in the 60s, they smuggled opium into the United States. There was a big heroin epidemic in the 60s. In the 80s, the CIA was caught smuggling cocaine from South America into the black neighborhoods in the crack cocaine epidemic. If you understand now, in 2018, the United States is once again saying that they're having a war on drugs with the opioid crisis in America. It's no coincidence that the United States Army is in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is one of the major producers of poppy, which is what is used to make opioid products. In the 80s, CIA was very much involved in South America with the Contras in Nicaragua and South America, where they produce poppy. They produce the plants that they make cocaine out of. And now, in the 60s, the heroin epidemic, the United States Army was in Vietnam, coincidentally enough. And in Vietnam, they grew a lot of those plants that helped to create heroin. So it's no coincidence. But anyway, you have to understand the patterns that this happens over and over again. And you have to be careful also whenever you hear in mainstream media when the United States government has a war on something, it's normally bad business for the average everyday person. They had the war on crime. The war on crime back in the 70s and the early 80s. Nixon and some of the others, they started what was known as the war on crime. And it's when they really start to push privatized prisons. And so then you had the war on crime in the late 70s and early 80s. You had the crack epidemic, which incarcerated a lot of, especially people of color, for crack cocaine. The sentencing disparity was extreme. It was like 101 crack. If you got caught with some crack cocaine, you get 100 times more prison time than for having the same amount of powdered cocaine. And of course, we know that crack was primarily at that time in the inner cities, and minorities were primarily the victims of that. Of course, you had the Clintons in the 90s with the 3-strike crime bill. Of course, that affected blacks and the such. So they had the war on crime there with the privatized prisons. Then they started the war on drugs. And then come to find out that the CIA and some other governmental entities were instrumental in helping the drugs come into America. And all this is documented. This is not something I'm making up myself, but there's 2 movies you can check out that's talking about it. One is called Kill the Messenger with Jeremy Renner. There's also a movie with Tom Cruise called American Made. Both of those are making reference to the crack cocaine or the cocaine epidemic in the 90s. And it shows how the government was a part of that or instrumental in that. There's a book called The Dark Alliance by Gary Webb. Gary Webb was the one who wrote the book Dark Alliance, who uncovered the connection between the CIA and drug smuggling into America. Of course, Gary Webb mysteriously died, and the coroner ruled it a suicide. He committed suicide by shooting himself in the head twice. That's what the official record says. Now, obviously, you can't shoot yourself in the head twice, so that was a message for him not keeping his mouth shut. And again, all these things are documented. It's not something that I'm speculating about, but I want you to understand the flow. I want you to understand the pattern that's happening, because part of like I said, people don't want to believe that these things are actually happening because they're blinded by this matrix that we're in. We're blinded by the mainstream media, and like I said, they perfected how to use mainstream media and the press. They perfected how to use the arts. So music and entertainment and movies and television stars are all part of this plan. They use governmental officials. So a lot of these governmental officials, they either want to get promoted into this system, and so they compromise, or many of them, they catch them in a compromising position and they blackmail them. And so they have to carry on the very strategy that's taking place. But this is not a new thing. It's the same thing that's repeated itself over time. And the Bible talks about all of these things and how this has come to pass. So we have to have our eyes open and our ears open. We can't fall victim. When you see this whole thing with Colin Kaepernick, this is classic Illuminati New World Order strategy. It's called controlled opposition. It's called controlled opposition. It's also something called the Hegelian dialectic that they use over and over again. For instance, in the Roman Empire, what they wanted to do is they wanted to persecute Christians in the beginning when Christianity first started becoming prevalent in the Roman Empire. And so they staged a fire. They caught one of the governmental buildings on fire, and they blamed the Christians so they could persecute the Christians. And then when you understand in Nazi Germany, they did the same thing. I think it's called the Reichstag fire or something, that they actually caused the fire, and it's called a false flag event, this major event, and they blamed the Jews so that they started to lock up the Jews. The Gulf of Tonkin in the 1960s, the United States government staged an event where they acted as though American warships were fired on by Vietnamese, and so it gave them the right through Congress for us to go to war with Vietnam. So these are things that have happened historically. It's nothing any different. It's called controlled opposition. So they control the narrative by raising up people that are supposed to be fighting against the very issue. It's also known as the Hegelian dialectic. So what they do is they'll raise up someone like a Colin Kaepernick to act like he's fighting against racism and discrimination, but in essence, he's actually carrying out their narrative. And so what happens is, because they're actually pushing the narrative, they're controlling the message, and because of that, the problem will never get solved, because it's not, they're trying to use a solution that doesn't work. What do I mean by that? And you know, I've heard people compare, and I'm not saying Colin Kaepernick doesn't have the right, or the NFL players don't have the right to kneel, but I'm trying to bring awareness so that we don't keep getting taken advantage of, especially black people. We keep getting taken advantage of because they understand that we operate on an emotional level, and because we're operating on an emotional level, we're easy to manipulate. And so now, because President Trump tweets against the kneeling players, now, guess what happens? Everybody's jumping on the bandwagon, even those who didn't kneel with Colin in the very beginning, because they're emotionally getting attached to being against President Trump instead of being for the issue. And the reason I say that even though he has the right to speak out or do whatever he wants to do, because he does, we're in the First Amendment, United States of America, but you can't solve a problem that you're not offering a real solution. Because what does kneeling at the national anthem have to do with police brutality? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's not a false flag, but it's a distraction. It's controlled opposition. So people can say, yeah, they're fighting against discrimination. If we really wanted to fight against police brutality, why wouldn't he stage a protest at the police station, or the mayor of the cities where these things are happening? Why go to the football game and you're basically arguing with people that aren't the problem? So the NFL owners aren't killing people, right? They're not shooting young black kids down. The white people that, 80% of NFL people that pay for tickets and go to the game are white people. They're not shooting black kids down in the neighborhood, at least, for the most part, they're not. So you're actually stirring up a problem now, because now you're putting them in opposition to your problem, and now they're playing the victim as though it's all about racism, and it's not about racism. That's such a small part of this whole scenario. But because of the emotional part of it, now you got some people want to burn Nikes, and some people want to go buy extra Nikes, just because of this issue. But it's part of the controlled opposition. LeBron James, the same thing. And one of the things that you'll know, when you know that they're basically getting bought and paid for, is when they get a huge contract, when they get these huge contract offers. Nike has admitted they've been paying Colin Kaepernick a whole bunch of money behind the scenes, even though he's not playing for the NFL right now. LeBron James signed a $500 million plus contract with Nike. These are lifetime contracts. And so in return, they have to carry out the agenda. And the thing that I say to black people all the time is, black people are always complaining about white supremacy. Do you think that the people that own Nike aren't part of white supremacy? Do you think that the people that own CNN or Fox News or these major media outlets, do you think that they're not part of white supremacy? Do you really believe that that LeBron James is facing the same type of racial injustice as the kid from Chicago that gets shot down, or the kid in Baltimore who died in the back of the police van? Do you really believe for 1 minute that these are equal? If LeBron really wants to do something, why doesn't he go to the police stations to fight the injustice? Why doesn't he go and help to identify judges that will get elected into judge seats so that they, on a local level, so that they can make sure that people get equal justice? Why? Those are the things that really solve the solution. I heard someone compare Colin Kaepernick with Rosa Parks and the protests the lunch counters, when they sat at the lunch counters. Now, that's an absurd, and it's not they're not equal. Why are they not equal? Because Rosa Parks was protesting laws that said that black people had to sit in the back of the bus or give up their seat for a white person. So she went to the bus where the law was in place, the policy was in place, and sat in the seats that she wasn't supposed to sit to. She directly attacked the problem, and because of that, they boycotted the buses. And so the bus company that had these illegal laws or unconstitutional laws had to change their policy. At the lunch counter, they were sitting at the lunch counter, which, because of Jim Crow laws, they could discriminate against you and say no colors allowed at the lunch counter. They sat at the lunch counter that they were prohibited from sitting at, and they protested, and they got so much recognition that these, whether it's the businesses or whether it's the municipality, had to go in and change laws that directly affected them. So that's how you solve a problem. But this is not a grassroots movement. This is a controlled opposition movement, and the controlled opposition movement is the oppressor, or the person that you're really mad at is controlling the narrative, and they're the ones directing the argument. So all these people have all this energy now, and think about how brilliant it is for Nike. Nike is brilliant. So what Nike has done is Nike has chimed in on this controversy. Now they're getting so much attention. So guess what? All these people that sympathize with the plight of Colin Kaepernick and the injustice in the black community, now they're going to go out and buy more Nikes. It's a brilliant move on Nike's part, and it's very interesting how things are going. But the reason I want to share this, I wanted to give you the history of these ideologies and how they control the narrative, and how this whole matrix that we live in is really taking advantage of the people that are saying that they're oppressed. And it's really your oppressor that is pushing the narrative. And so when we put all of our energy behind the narrative that's being pushed by our oppressor, we never get solutions. We never get real solutions. If you really believe in white supremacy, you have to believe that white supremacy I talked about the Illuminati, or the ruling elite. These are the people that we don't sit at their tables. We don't sit, we're not in their meetings when they have meetings, whether it's the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, the Order of the Illuminati, there's several other organizations, the Boule, the Black Boule. There's many organizations that are part of these secret societies, and you're not a part of those. So you got to realize that this is called controlled opposition. It's something they've developed for a long time. They are actually using the media and entertainment and all these other places. They're using it to control the narrative so that you use all your energy in a non-productive way, and it will never solve the problem. And the biggest danger of this is that once you get to a point where you protest based on their narrative, and just to let you know, Black Lives Matter as well. Black Lives Matter was funded. They got millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars in contributions from George Soros, who was actually a Nazi sympathizer from Austria in World War II. He doesn't care about black people either. He was part of the Nazis. He helped the Nazis in World War II. So anyway, so again, it's controlled opposition. They shape the narrative. They use the media, they use entertainers, they use popular people in order to promote their agenda. And in return, these people get a whole bunch of money. They get rewarded handsomely. Colin Kaepernick he's not struggling. Not that I'm against people being wealthy, but the real story has to come out. So, and ultimately, the reason I'm saying all this is when you are walking by the flesh and not by the spirit, you're going to get manipulated and controlled by those who control the fleshly lusts, right? The prince of this world. And then people will spend their time and their energy following after this controlled opposition narrative. Nothing ever gets changed, and the only thing it does is leads to complacency, because in the future, when they show you another black kid that gets shot by a cop, most people, especially young people, are going to say there's no use in even protesting. Nothing ever changes. This is just how things are supposed to be. And when that happens, then you're worse off than when you started. And so if you do want to protest something, have the right strategy, have the right time and the right place. Again, if you are protesting police brutality, go to the police, go to the police chief, go to the mayor of the city, go to the areas where this is happening. If you really believe that this is something, if you think that there's some kind of injustice in the world, go to the place where this injustice is happening. Don't kneel at a football game. It's not helping anything. It's only making things worse. It's only making people argue and fuss more, because there's never, and I promise you, most of the people that are against the kneeling, very few people are inherently saying, yeah, I think it's okay for black people to get harassed by police. That's not the case. That's not the narrative. That's not what's going on. But what they are saying is, you're disrespecting the flag. That's what's going on in their mind. And what they are saying, because I've talked to people and I hear them saying, is, what does kneeling against the flag have to do with a kid that gets shot or abused by a police officer? The other thing that you'll hear them say is that how hypocritical is it for this multi-million-dollar athlete to protest the very nation and the very system that allowed him to be rich and famous? Because here's what they're saying. I'm telling you, this is the narrative, and it makes sense. Because if it was that unfair, how can a black person be making get a $100 million contract and start for an NFL team? How could that be if that's the case? And also that if they were in any other country in the world, they wouldn't be making, tens of millions of dollars playing a game. This has been Dr. Joe Green. Until next time, peace and blessings to you. And I just pray you have an open mind. Don't just listen to the narrative that you're being fed. Understand that the prince of this world, this matrix that we live in, is basically a controlled opposition against God and his plan as well. So until next time, peace and blessings to you. Shalom, shalom.